Hello everyone, and welcome back to Deep Chronicles World. Before you cozy up and drift off into dreamland, I've got a fun idea. Why not drop a comment below and share where in the world you're tuning in from? Hey, if you're enjoying these stories as much as I love sharing them, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's get comfy, relax, and dive into tonight's tale. Ready? In a time when laws were mere ink on paper and the streets held the true power, there whispered a name everyone knew but dared not speak aloud. A name that built an empire from nothing, an empire founded on blood, fear, and insatiable greed. Capone. Imagine a simple boy, his father, a humble Italian immigrant. They had no wealth, no status, yet this boy possessed an ambition that dwarfed the very streets he grew up in. An ambition that would etch his name into every alley, every speakeasy in Chicago. Al Capone wasn't just a mob boss. He was anything far more cunning, far more dangerous. From the clandestine species peddling illicit liquor to the very pillars of power, the Palisade, the courts, everyone seemed to dance to his tune. But how did he ascend Tassac Heights? What was the secret that always kept him one step ahead? As they say, greed is a man's greatest enemy. Capone, who seemingly held everything within his grasp, suddenly found tables turning. Those he trusted betrayed him. The city that once hailed him as its king now hunted him relentlessly. His questing then becomes not just how Capone built his empire, but how it crumbled, and the price he paid for the life he led. This isn't just another gangster story, a mere chronicle of crimes and body counts. It's the story of a man who forget his own legend, only to become lost in his shadows. Prepare yourselves, for what you're about to hear is not just a story, but a testament to avarice, treachery, and the downfall of one of history's most notorious figures. But this is just the beginning. Many tales remain untold, secrets buried deep, and mysteries that boggled the mind. How did it all begin? Who aided his rise? And what ultimately led to his downfall? Stay with me, and you'll uncover the complete saga from the first bullet fired to his final days behind bars. Because what's to come is not just a story, but a puzzle. A reality more captivating than fiction. Once upon a time, laws were mere ink on paper, and the streets ruled supreme. There was a name everyone whispered, but no one dared to speak louder. Name that forged an empire out of nothing. An empire built on blood, fear, and greed. The name Capone. Picture this, a young boy, ordinary, the son of a simple Italian immigrant. They had no wealth, no status, but this boy had a dream far bigger than the streets he grew up in. A dream that would etch his name into every alley, every corner of Chicago. Capone wasn't just a gang leader. He was smarter, more dangerous than that dot from speakeasies, selling bootlegged liquor to the police and courts. Everyone worked for him. But how did he rise to such heights? What was the secret that always kept him one step ahead? They say greed is man's greatest enemy. Capone, who once had everything in his grasp, suddenly found the tables turning. Those he trusted betrayed him, and the city that once crowned him king now hunted him. But the question isn't just how Capone built his empire, it's how it crumbled. Matisse, what price did he pay to live this life? This isn't just the tale of an ordinary mob boss or a string of crimes in numbers. This is the story of a man who crafted his own legend with his hands and lost himself in it. Prepare yourselves, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a testament to greed, betrayal, and the fall of one of history's most dangerous men. But this is only the beginning. There are countless untold stories, secrets yet to surface, and mysteries beyond imagination. How did it all start? Who helped him? What led to his downfall? Stay with me as we unraveled the full story from the first bullet to his final days behind bars. What's coming isn't just a tale, it's a riddle, a truth more dangerous than fiction. But before we begin, let me tell you, the narrator, and I'll guide you through every twist, every shadowy corner of this saga. If you love this kind of content and want me to keep going, I need your support. So hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and leave a like after the video. Now, let's dive into our story. Shall we take a trip back in time? Let's go to January 17th, 1899 in Brooklyn, New York. In that moment, a child was born, a small boy named Alphonse Gabriel Capone. He was just an ordinary kid, like any other. But who could have imagined that this boy would become one of the most feared and infamous mobsters in history? Let me paint you a picture of Capone's background. His family were Italian immigrants, specifically from Naples. His father was a barber, his mother a homemaker, and the family was poor. Imagine people who came to New York chasing the American dream, only to find a harsh life filled with hunger, violence, and crime at every corner. Capone attended a Catholic school, but he had a temper and no patience. They say that at 14, he hit his teacher. Why? Because the teacher humiliated him in front of the class. The school didn't forgive him and expelled him. From that moment, the streets became his real school. In the streets of Brooklyn, you didn't have many options, especially if you were poor. You either worked hard and lived on the edge, or you were drawn into the world of crime. Capone's first job was with small gangs, like the 5 Points Gang, which was notorious in New York at the time. He learned the basics from them: how to evade the police, how to intimidate people, how to earn their trust or eliminate them if necessary. Here, we need to imagine young Capone, sharp-witted but with no boundaries. Life wasn't easy for him, and these circumstances were the main reason he chose this path. Think about it. How could the life of a child born into a poor family in a harsh society turn him into a figure that all of America feared? The story is just beginning, and what's coming is even greater and more dangerous. Once the streets had spoken to Capone, it was time for him to take his first official step into the world of crime. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would separate the young boy from the mobster who would shake all of America. New York, at the time, was a city that never slept not in its nightlife, nor in its crime. Capone was part of the 5 Points Gang, one of the most dangerous gangs in New York at the time. The gang was like a second school for him, teaching him everything: how to terrify people, how to control neighborhoods, how to enforce his own laws. But there was one thing that set Capone apart: his personality. He always wanted to be in control, the one everyone feared. This, of course, led to conflicts even within the gang itself. One day, Capone was working at a bar with Frankie Yale, a key figure in his life. Capone had a bad habit: he would make crude remarks about women. And then, the unexpected happened. Huge fight broke out between him and a man whose sister he had insulted. The fight ended with a deep scar on Capone's face, earning him the nickname Scarface. The strange thing about this story is that Capone always told people the scar was from World War I, even though he never served. But imagine that scar became a symbol of his power. People would think twice before crossing him when they saw it. Frankie Yale, the bar owner Capone worked for, wasn't just a boss, he was a mentor. He taught Capone how to assert his dominance, how to make fear his greatest weapon, and how to use violence as a tool. Frankie saw something different in Capone, a smart young man with no red lines, who knew how to seize every opportunity. And so, when Johnny Torrio, one of Chicago's top mobsters, saw Capone, he saw the perfect right-hand man. Johnny had a vision, and he needed someone who could work with a cold heart and handle the streets of Chicago. It was Torrio who invited Capone to move from New York to Chicago, and that's where the real story began. But let me tell you, something life in the world of crime is never free of betrayal. Even in the small gangs Capone worked with in New York, he faced problems. His strong, domineering personality didn't sit well with everyone, and people tried to betray him, to eliminate him before he grew too powerful. Okay? But as they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. This period in Capone's life was a phase of preparation and learning. He learned that trust must be given cautiously, and that to succeed in the world of crime, you always have to stay one step ahead. With the experience he gained in Johnny Torrio's invitation to move to Chicago, Capone was ready to begin the most dangerous chapter of his life, chapter that would make him a legend in every sense of the word. And at the same time as America was trying to clean up its act and curb corruption, the Prohibition Act of 1920 was passed, banning alcohol entirely. But instead of order, chaos erupted. America became a paradise for mobsters, and Capone saw his golden opportunity. He decided to enter the game with full force. The law was clear: producing, selling, or even transporting alcohol was completely banned. But what Americans didn't anticipate was that people weren't going to stop drinking. Alcohol was a part of everyone's life, from the working class to businessmen, even politicians. And that's where the game began. The government banned alcohol, the mob would supply it, and the profits were astronomical. Capone and Torrio built a massive network for bootlegging. Imagine secret factories, hidden warehouses in back alleys, trucks transporting alcohol right under the noses of the police. Capone didn't just smuggle alcohol, he controlled its production and distribution from the factory straight to the consumer. He had people everywhere, people to produce, people to transport, people to sell. And of course, all of this was under the protection of the mob. When Capone arrived in Chicago, the situation was already complicated. Gangs were fighting for control of the city, but with Johnny Torrio, Capone saw a chance to expand his empire. Chicago was the perfect city: a large population, plenty of money, and a corrupt government that took bribes. Over time, Capone became the #1 name in the city's underworld. The streets of Chicago were under his control. If you wanted to open a speakeasy or sell alcohol, you had to pay a tax to Capone. If you tried to work behind his back, the solution was simple: bullet, and the story ended. But of course, power doesn't come without enemies. And Capone's greatest rival was George Bugs Moran, the leader of a rival gang from Chicago's north side. The rivalry between them was anything but peaceful. Street wars, assassinations, and bombings became a daily occurrence in Chicago. The tension between Capone and Moran reached its peak with the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre in 1929, which we'll delve into later. But the important thing here is that Capone was always one step ahead of his enemies. Capone wasn't just an ordinary mobster. He had a clear plan. If you wanted to be the leader, you had to buy everyone. The police, the courts, even politicians were in his pocket, thanks to bribes. And let's not forget his network of informants, who kept him informed of every move before it happened. The money he made from the alcohol trade was so vast that he controlled the entire market. If anyone tried to enter his territory, they either lost everything or ended up dead. In a very short time, Capone wasn't just a mob boss, he became a legend. People feared him, but at the same time, they were in awe of him. His life was full of contradictions, brutality and murder on one hand, generosity and support for the poor on the other. Chicago was his kingdom, and those who crossed him didn't live to tell the tale. But here, Capone entered a new phase of his life, one of absolute control. But as you know, every empire must eventually fall, and Capone's downfall was more dramatic than anyone could have imagined. In the heart of Chicago, Capone wasn't just a mob boss, he was the undisputed king. The entire city was under his control its streets, its clubs, even its government. But, of course, power comes at a price, and that price was written in blood. Let me tell you, Capone wasn't just an ordinary mob boss. The man held Chicago in his grip from every angle. The alcohol trade, no one could sell without his permission. Gambling, you had to pay your share if you wanted to play. Even the stock market was under his control. Capone's empire was complete, and everyone had to work for him or pay the price. But despite his power, there was one enemy standing in his wage warge: Bugs Moran, the leader of the North Side Gang. Moran constantly challenged Capone and refused to bow to him, and so Capone decided to put an end to it. The end was bloody in every sense of the word. Let's talk about one of the most brutal crimes in the history of organized crime, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. This story alone encapsulates Capone's ruthlessness and criminal genius. It all started with a meticulous plan. Capone decided he needed to eliminate Moran and his gang in one fell swoop. The planning was devilish. Pawns, men dressed as police officers and prepared to fake police cars. The goal was to ambush Moran and his men and wipe them out. On February 14, 1929, Moran's men were gathered in a garage on Chicago's north side. Suddenly, police cars entered, and Capone's men, disguised as officers, ordered Moran's men to line up against the wall. What followed was a massacre, devastating blow to Moran's gang. Capone's name was now on everyone's lips in America. The police, the press, even the federal government were all watching him. But the story wasn't all roses. With all this power, Capone began to face betrayal from within. Greed was the biggest problem. Everyone wanted a bigger piece of the pie. This forced Capone to eliminate some of his own men to maintain the loyalty of the rest. Imagine a man who had to fight his enemies outside while maintaining his grip inside. But despite all his crimes, Capone was a media genius. He presented himself to the public as a successful businessman, even donating to the poor and helping the needy. The press at the time dubbed him the Robin Hood of Chicago. But this was all a facade. The truth was that Capone was a leader of an empire built on blood and crime. Behind the scenes, everything was in his hands: bribes, murder, control. After the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Capone became public enemy number one. The police had no direct evidence against him, but the massacre exposed him to the world. And that's when the questions began. How would he maintain his empire under all this pressure? But what happened next would be the beginning of the fall of the Capone legend, a fall as powerful as his rise. But before we continue, a quick break. If you've made it this far, you must be enjoying the video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and now let's continue. Capone, the man all of America was talking about, wasn't just a ruthless mob boss. He also had a personal life full of intrigue, a strange mix of a cold-blooded criminal and a devoted husband, a professional killer, and a Robin Hood in a Chicago version. Capone married May Coughlin in 1918. May was a simple girl with no ties to the world of crime. When she entered Capone's life, she became an essential part of it. She was the only person Capone could talk to about his worries, his fears of betrayal, and his limitless ambitions. Despite everything happening around the murder, betrayal, their relationship endured. May was the clean face of the Capone family, keeping the media and neighbors away from any problems that might reveal the dark side of her husband. Capone lived by a principle: if you're the leader, everyone must see your authority. His lavish lifestyle was the talk of the town. Luxury cars no one could dream of at the time, massive mansions filled with every form of indulgence, and never-ending parties. His mansion in Miami was like paradise: huge swimming pools, gardens, and servants at every corner. Even the parties he threw were legendary, featuring the finest band, alcohol, and the most famous musicians of the time. But this opulence wasn't just for show, was also a way to display his power. When you saw all this wealth, you wouldn't dare cross someone like Capone. But what's even stranger is that Capone wasn't just a heartless mobster. He had a human side, or at least he tried to show it. In Chicago, the poor were suffering from a crushing economic crisis, and Capone saw an opportunity. He established soup kitchens for the poor, providing free meals to needy families. People saw him as a folk hero, someone who helped the little guy when the government ignored them. The press portrayed him as a great man, and some even claimed he saved their lives. But let me tell you the truth, all these donations were just a facade. Capone wanted to build a positive image, one that would make people forget he was the reason for the corruption and poverty they lived in. Capone was the living embodiment of duality. By day, he appeared as a well-dressed, smiling man who helped the poor and attended parties with the rich. But by night, he transformed into a dangerous criminal who had no problem ordering the deaths of dozens just to maintain his image. He had a strange ability to separate his public and private personas. When you saw him with his family, he seemed like an ordinary, manner-loving husband and father. But behind the scenes, he was planning the most heinous crimes. But despite his power, Capone had moments of weakness. He always feared betrayal, always worried that one day he would lose everything he had built. And this fear made him live in complete isolation, trusting no one, not even himself. In 1934, Capone was transferred to Alcatraz, the most infamous prison in the world. Alcatraz was different from any other prison. There was no special treatment, no bribes, no room for control. In Alcatraz, Capone became just a number. No one cared that he was once the king of Chicago. Teas passed slowly, and memories of his former life haunted him. Imagine a man who lived his entire life surrounded by luxury and power, now ending up in a cell like an ordinary man, stripped of all control. Carter, in his final days at Alcatraz, Capone could barely speak. He became completely isolated, living in a difficult psychological state. The man who once planned the greatest crimes could now barely utter a few words. Capone, the boss who ruled Chicago and made his name synonymous with terror and power, ended his life in a tragic way. Far from the spotlight and power. From the man who had everything to the man who had nothing. In 1939, after years of suffering, at Alcatraz, a major surprise, a colonel was released due to his deteriorating health. The syphilis he suffered from had reached an advanced stage. After his release, Capone moved to Florida, where he lived out his final days in near-total isolation. The place was quiet, a stark contrast to his life filled with gangs, money, and fame. The days passed slowly, as if time had stopped. He became known more for his ramblings and disturbing memories, suffering from partial memory loss due to his illness. Far from the people who once respected and feared him, Capone became just a sick old man suffering from loneliness and torment. On January 25, 1947, at the age of 48, Capone died in Florida. The end was shocking, but it was easy to predict after years of illness and prison. The man who was once considered the most powerful figure in the world of crime ended his life quietly. There were no warnings, no heroic tales, just a sick man who died. His death affected many who witnessed the rise and fall of Capone. But even in death, Capone's legacy lived on. In American gangster culture, his name continued to echo. He became a symbol of power and control, but also a symbol of the inevitable downfall of violent systems. His influence on the world of crime was immense, inspiring countless gangs after him and shaping a new image of organized crime in America. Although he died young, his legacy remains alive. Movies and books still talk about Capone, the man who terrified everyone, the man whose life flipped from luxury and power to weakness and isolation. And so, our story for today ends. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss any of my videos. Check out this video because it's really good, and if anyone has any ideas, write them in the comments. This was your narrator, signing off. Jerry's descent into crime began innocently enough, at least, as innocent as theft can be. At just 15 years old, he started stealing food from stores to survive. What set him apart from other petty thieves was his meticulous attention to detail. Before entering a store, Jerry would scout it thoroughly, identifying surveillance cameras and testing whether they were operational. If they were, he'd find ways to disable or evade them. Once inside, he moved like a ghost, lightning fast, yet utterly silent. No alarms blared. No witnesses noticed. His early exploits weren't limited to simple shoplifting. He quickly graduated to more sophisticated schemes, targeting high-value items from chains like Radio Shack. After stealing electronics, Jerry would forge receipts so convincing that even seasoned retailers couldn't tell they were fake. These forged documents allowed him to resell stolen goods without raising suspicion. With each successful operation, his confidence soared, and so did his ambition. It wasn't long before Jerry realized that bigger risks yielded bigger rewards. One fateful night in March 1997, Jerry executed what would become his first major heist. Partnering with a friend, he rented a transport truck, disabled the alarms at a Radio Shack warehouse, and emptied it of all its inventory. The loot was worth thousands of dollars, and Jerry celebrated his victory with pride. But his triumph was short-lived. Just days later, SWAT teams stormed his house, arresting him for the robbery. Despite being caught red-handed, Jerry managed to pull off an incredible escape during interrogation, a preview of the cunning tactics he'd employed throughout his criminal career. Jerry's ability to outwit authorities became legendary. During one arrest, he hid on the ceiling of a police station, evading detection for hours before sneaking out undetected. Another time, handcuffed and left alone in a patrol car, he freed himself using sheer flexibility and drove off in the vehicle. Each narrow escape only emboldened him further, pushing him toward increasingly daring crimes. After serving a 7-year sentence for various offenses, Jerry was deported to Canada in 1997 due to his Canadian origins. Far from deterred, he saw this as an opportunity to reinvent himself. Settling in Winnipeg, he resumed his criminal activities almost immediately. Using forged IDs and aliases, he reportedly used over 22 different names. Jerry orchestrated a series of bank robberies across Canada. His methods were nothing short of ingenious. For instance, in 2006, he targeted a newly constructed CIBC bank branch before it officially opened. Knowing the building lacked security personnel and alarm systems, Jerry entered through its ventilation system, disabled motion detectors remotely, and extracted cash trays from a T-Mizol without triggering a single alert. A staggering $750,000. But Jerry's ego proved to be his Achilles heel. A suspicious vehicle parked near a Walmart opposite the targeted bank drew investigators' attention. Night guards routinely checked license plates in the parking lot to identify abandoned cars, and one such check revealed a rental car registered under Gerald Blanchard's name. Though initially dismissed as circumstantial, this clue provided authorities with their first lead. Meanwhile, Jerry compounded his errors by contacting the bank manager anonymously, claiming knowledge of the robbery and warning of a second armed attempt. While intended to mislead authorities, this call inadvertently highlighted his involvement, narrowing the net around him. If there's one crime that defines Jerry's legacy, it's the theft of Empress Elizabeth's diamond star from Vienna's Schönbrunn Palace. In 1998, while touring Europe with his then-wife, Ramona Boss, Jerry visited the CC Museum, where the priceless artifact was displayed. Captivated by its beauty and historical significance, he decided to steal it not for profit, but as leverage. should he ever face arrest. Over several visits, Jerry meticulously studied the palace's security protocols, guard rotations, and potential entry points. On the night of the theft, he infiltrated the highly secure premises undetected, replacing the original star with a flawless replica. For weeks, Shinbrun officials remained oblivious to the theft. Only upon closer inspection during routine maintenance did they discover the deception. An internal investigation ensued, reviewing surveillance footage and visitor logs. Yet, Jerry's expertise rendered their efforts fruitless. Unbeknownst to them, he had smuggled the diamond star out of Austria and hidden it at his grandmother's house in Canada. Years passed before the truth came to light. In 2007, Ramona learned of Jerry's true identity as a wanted criminal and discovered his involvement in the theft of the diamond star. Devastated by the betrayal, she divorced him and reported his crimes to the police. Cooperation provided investigators with critical information, including Jerry's phone number, enabling them to monitor his communications. This development marked a turning point in their pursuit of justice, linking Jerry to a web of international crimes spanning continents and decades. Jerry's criminal empire extended far beyond Canada, reaching into the shadowy world of international credit card fraud and arms smuggling. Tasked by a shadowy figure known as the President, Jerry assembled a team to execute a high-stakes mission in Cairo, Egypt. Posing as veiled women to avoid detection, the group withdrew millions of dollars from a team using counterfeit cards embedded with real account information. However, tensions arose when Palom Cash, a member of the team, absconded with a significant portion of the loot, prompting Jerry to navigate treacherous waters as suspicions mounted among his associates. Unbeknownst to Jerry, the president's operations extended beyond credit card fraud. Investigations later revealed that he was deeply involved in arms smuggling, supplying weapons including machine guns and rocket launchers to criminal organizations worldwide. When Jerry learned of this connection, he understood the gravity of his predicament. The stakes had been raised exponentially, placing him squarely in the crosshairs of individuals who operated without moral constraints. Faced with mounting pressure, Jerry devised a plan to appease the president. He would carry out another bank heist in Canada to compensate for the stolen funds. Upon returning to Canada, he identified a newly constructed bank branch as his next target. Like previous operations, he meticulously studied its layout and security protocols, preparing to infiltrate the building through its ventilation system. However, just as he prepared to execute the plan, he noticed a suspicious vehicle parked nearby, likely belonging two secret agents monitoring the area. Sensing danger, Jerry aborted the mission, realizing that proceeding would jeopardize his safety. Despite canceling the robbery, law enforcement remained hot on Jerry's trail. Agents monitoring his communications uncovered evidence linking him to arms smuggling activities, further complicating his legal troubles. Surveillance footage and intercepted phone calls provided damning proof of his involvement in both credit card fraud and illegal arms deals. Armed with this information, authorities decided to act swiftly, raiding Jerry's home and arresting him alongside 20 others implicated in his fraudulent schemes. During searches of his property, investigators uncovered hidden rooms containing incriminating evidence, including forged documents, stolen keys, and surveillance footage documenting his crimes. Among the most startling discoveries were thousands of counterfeit credit cards, security personnel uniforms, and countless video clips capturing every aspect of his illicit activities. These recordings served as both trophies and tools for self-promotion, underscoring Jerry's narcissistic tendencies. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Jerry struck a deal with prosecutors, offering to return the diamond star in exchange for reduced charges. Authorities agreed, recognizing the historical significance of the artifact and its value as a cultural treasure. In addition to negotiating leniency for himself, Jerry insisted that none of his accomplices face punishment, taking full responsibility for their collective actions. While some viewed this gesture as noble, Others saw it as further evidence of his manipulative nature, his final attempt to control the narrative surrounding his downfall. Jerry's sentencing marked the culmination of decades of criminal activity. Accused 16 times of theft and fraud, he received an 8-year prison term, significantly less than the life sentence initially anticipated. This outcome reflected both his cooperation with authorities and the strategic leverage provided by the Diamond Star. Yet, despite serving his sentence, Jerry struggled to break free from the cycle of crime that defined his existence. Shortly after his release in 2010, he resumed minor thefts, underscoring the difficulty of reforming patterns established over decades. Throughout his trial, Jerry maintained an air of defiance, proudly recounting his exploits without expressing remorse. He likened himself to James Bond, framing his crimes as thrilling adventures rather than morally reprehensible acts. This attitude reflects a fundamental disconnect between his perception of himself and societal norms. For Jerry, theft was not merely a means to an end, but an addiction fueled by adrenaline and ego. Even after serving his sentence, he resumed minor thefts, unable to break free from the cycle of crime that defined his existence. Ultimately, Gerald Blanchard's story serves as a mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature. His tale challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about ambition, morality, and the pursuit of success. It reminds us that while genius can unlock doors, it cannot absolve wrongdoing. True fulfillment, as Jerry's tale illustrates, lies not in evasion, but in embracing responsibility and striving for authenticity. Yet the phone call that came into the police dispatch center that day was one that no operator could ever forget. The voice on the other end of the line was frantic, trembling with panic and desperation. "You need to come now." The man screamed, his words tumbling out in a chaotic rush. "Our friend is dead. It's in his house, and there's blood everywhere." The operator tried to calm him, her voice steady as she asked for the address and details, but the man was inconsolable. "He's been missing for days. We thought something was wrong, but we didn't expect this." The call ended abruptly, leaving the operator with a sense of dread that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Police units were dispatched immediately, their sirens wailing as they tore through the quiet suburban streets. The neighborhood they arrived in was the picture of tranquility, with neatly trimmed lawns and white picket fences. It was the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen, where the biggest scandal might be a neighbor's dog digging up someone else's flower bed. But as the officers approached the house in question, they were greeted by a smell that turned their stomachs, a pungent, sickly odor that they recognized all too well. It was the smell of death, and it was coming from inside the house. Two people were waiting outside, a man and a woman, both pale and visibly shaken. The woman was clutching her phone like a lifeline. The man's hands were trembling as he tried to explain what had happened. "We broke in," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "We hadn't heard from him in weeks, and we were worried, but we didn't expect." His voice trailed off, and he shook his head, unable to continue. The officers exchanged grim looks before stepping inside. The house was eerily silent, the kind of silence that pressed down on you, making it hard to breathe. The air was heavy with the stench of decomposition, and every step the officers took seemed to echo louder than it should have. The two friends led them down a hallway, their footsteps hesitant as if they were afraid of what they might see again. And then they reached the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and one of the officers pushed it open, his hand steady despite the dread pooling in his stomach. The scene that greeted them was like something out of a horror movie. Travis Alexander's body lay on the floor, partially decomposed, surrounded by a pool of dried blood. His throat had been slit so deeply that it was nearly severed, and his body was riddled with stab wounds. The blood had soaked into the carpet, leaving dark, crusted stains that spoke of a violent struggle. The room itself was in disarray, with items scattered across the floor as if there had been a desperate fight for survival. One of the officers turned away, swallowing hard to keep from gagging, while another muttered a curse under his breath. This wasn't just a murder, it was a massacre. The forensic team was called in immediately, and the house was cordoned off with the yellow tape. Outside, the two friends sat on the curb, their faces pale and their hands shaking as they tried to process what they had just seen. The detective assigned to the case arrived shortly after, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene. He was a seasoned investigator, someone who had seen his fair share of gruesome crimes, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of shock in his eyes as he stepped into the bedroom. This was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The detective nodded, taking notes as she spoke. Did he have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt him? At this, the woman's eyes widened, and she glanced at her companion before speaking. Yes, she said quickly. There's one person, Jodi Arias. She was obsessed with him. The detective's pen paused mid-sentence, and he looked up sharply. Tell me about her, he said, his tone sharp with interest. And so, the story of Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias began to unfold. Travis was a man who seemed to have it all. At 33 years old, he was charismatic, successful, and deeply rooted in his Mormon faith. But his life hadn't always been easy. Born into a troubled family, Travis and his siblings endured years of neglect and abuse. Their parents were addicts, more concerned with feeding their habits than caring for their children. The kids were often left alone for days at a time, surviving on scraps and living in filth. Despite these hardships, Travis remained optimistic. He believed that one day he would rise above his circumstances and create a better life for himself. That chance came when an elderly couple adopted him and his siblings. They provided the stability and love that Travis had never known, introducing him to their Mormon faith and encouraging him to pursue his dreams. Travis embraced his new life with enthusiasm, excelling in school and eventually graduating from college. He landed a prestigious job at a law firm where his outgoing personality and infectious smile made him popular among his peers. He quickly became a rising star in his community, known for his generosity and unwavering faith. In 2004, his company transferred him to Arizona, a move that would change his life forever. It was there, at a company conference, that he met Jodi Arias. Jodi was stunningly beautiful, with a magnetic presence that drew people to her. She had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, and Travis was no exception. The two quickly hit it off, bonding over their shared love of adventure and their dreams for the future. But while Travis saw their relationship as a casual friendship, Jodi saw it as something much more. She became infatuated with him, convinced that he was her soulmate. At first, Travis was flattered by her attention. He enjoyed her company and admired her passion for life. But as time went on, he began to notice a darker side to her personality. Their relationship became a toxic cycle of highs and lows. Jodi, desperate to win Travis's love, converted to Mormonism and began attending church with him. She hoped that by embracing his faith, she could prove her devotion and convince him to marry her. Kara, though he cared for Jodi, couldn't ignore the warning signs. He knew deep down that their relationship was unhealthy, and he began to pull away. Jodi, however, refused to let go. She followed him to Arizona, moving into an apartment just a few miles from his house. She showed up unannounced, called him constantly, and even hacked into his email and social media accounts. Her obsession consumed her, driving her to desperate measures. The breaking point came when Travis started seeing another woman. Jodi discovered their relationship and flew into a rage. She confronted Travis, accusing him of betrayal and demanding answers. Travis, fed up with her behavior, told her it was over. He wanted nothing more to do with her. But Jody couldn't accept this. In her mind, Travis belonged to her, and if she couldn't have him, no one could. What happened next is a chilling testament to the depths of her obsession. Turned violent. Jody stabbed Travis repeatedly, slashing his throat so deeply that it nearly severed his head. She then shot him in the head, ensuring that he was dead. The brutality of the attack was shocking, even to seasoned investigators. After the murder, Jody tried to cover her tracks. She cleaned the crime scene, disposed of the murder weapon, and even took steps to create an alibi. But her efforts were in vain. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and it wasn't long before she was arrested and charged with Travis's murder. The trial that followed was a media sensation, drawing national attention and sparking heated debates about love, obsession, and justice. Jody's defense team argued that she had acted in self-defense, claiming that Travis had been abusive and that she had feared for her life. But the prosecution painted a different picture, presenting evidence of Jody's obsession and her calculated plan to kill Travis. In the end, the jury found Jody guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The story of Travis, Alexander, and Jody Arias is a tragic reminder of how love can turn into obsession, and how that obsession can lead to unspeakable violence. Travis was a man who had overcome incredible odds to build a life filled with promise and potential. He was loved by his friends and admired by his community, and his death left a void that could never be filled. Jody, on the other hand, was a woman consumed by her own desires, willing to do whatever it took to get what she wanted. Her actions not only ended Travis's life, but also destroyed her own. The case continues to fascinate and horrify, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked obsession and the devastating consequences it can have. As the years pass, the story of Travis and Jody serves as a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder of how quickly love can turn to hate, and how that hate can lead to tragedy. The phone call that started it all remains etched in the memory of those who heard it. A haunting echo of a life cut short and a love gone terribly wrong. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. In the quiet town of Leipzig, Germany, nestled within the unassuming walls of a house that appeared utterly ordinary to any passerby, a 19-year-old boy was about to embark on a journey that defied imagination. This was no ordinary adventure, but a daring and perilous plunge into the shadowy world of cybercrime. Maximilian Schmidt, a seemingly unremarkable and reserved young man, was poised to become the mastermind behind one of Germany's largest online empires for the sale of illicit substances. What he achieved was nothing short of astonishing. From the confines of his modest bedroom, he harnessed his technical prowess in the labyrinthine depths of the dark web to build a criminal network that generated millions of euros. At first glance, Maximilian's room was indistinguishable from that of any typical teenager. A bed, some posters, a few electronic gadgets scattered about. But behind this mundane facade lay the nerve center of a sprawling drug trafficking operation. Within those four walls, over 100 kilograms of illegal substances were meticulously stored. Heroin, cocaine, hashish, Captagon, and even banned pharmaceuticals. Each item was carefully packaged, photographed, and listed for sale on his website, accessible to clients across the globe. These customers could discreetly place their orders, and their packages would be shipped directly to them, as seamlessly as if they were purchasing a mundane item from Amazon. But how did a teenager with no prior experience in drug trafficking manage to construct such an empire? The story begins in 2013, when Maximilian, a curious and tech-savvy young man, encountered a certain Johann online. Johann introduced him to the infamous Silk Road, the first major dark web marketplace dedicated to the sale of illegal goods. Intrigued Maximilian downloaded the Tor browser, a tool for anonymous internet browsing, and began exploring this clandestine marketplace. What he discovered fascinated him. Thousands of illegal products, anonymous transactions conducted in Bitcoin, in a system that appeared to operate beyond the reach of law enforcement. Yet, rather than simply marveling at Silk Road's operations, Maximilian conceived an audacious idea. Why not create his own version of the site, but better? He noticed flaws in Silk Road's model: poor customer service, slow delivery times, and inflated prices. He believed he could offer a superior experience, competitive pricing, faster shipping, and impeccable service. Johann, skeptical, mocked him. "You're just a kid. You don't even know any suppliers to source these substances." But Maximilian, undeterred, resolved to prove him wrong. For weeks, he scoured the dark web in search of suppliers. Eventually, he connected with a vendor known as Red Bull, who agreed to provide him with samples of cocaine and other drugs. Maximilian paid in Bitcoin, and the products were delivered to his doorstep via mail. Remarkably, despite his deep involvement in this dangerous world, Maximilian never used drugs himself. He didn't smoke, drink, or even know much about the effects of the substances he sold. To educate himself, he turned to online research, watching videos and reading articles about the effects of cocaine, heroin, and other narcotics. With his first batch of products in hand, Maximilian began building his website. Despite having no prior experience in web development, he quickly taught himself the basics and created a platform he named Shiny Flakes. Unlike Silk Road, which operated exclusively on the dark web, Shiny Flakes was accessible via the regular internet, making it far more user-friendly for customers. Maximilian implemented a Bitcoin payment system to ensure anonymity and crafted a detailed FAQ section to address common customer queries, such as, "How will my order be delivered?" and "Is this safe?" To attract customers, he photographed his products with a professional touch. Using a simple camera and an Xbox with a reflective surface, he created images that gave his products a sleek, luxurious appeal. Customers, impressed by the quality of the photos, began flocking to the site. Within weeks, Shiny Flakes became a resounding success. Orders poured in from across Germany and soon from around the world: the United States, China, Australia, and even Colombia, a country renowned for its drug production. But Maximilian didn't stop at merely selling drugs. He revolutionized customer service in this illicit industry. Each order was meticulously packaged and accompanied by a small gift: gummy candies. This simple yet thoughtful gesture earned him glowing reviews from customers who praised not only the quality of the products, but also the attention to detail. As the months passed, Maximilian's profits skyrocketed. By January 2014, he was earning over 15,000 euros. A few months later, his daily revenue reached an astonishing 100,000 euros. Yet, he remained remarkably discreet. He continued living with his mother and stepfather, who were oblivious to his activities. He avoided flashy spending, opting instead to save his earnings and even recycle empty bottles to avoid raising suspicions. However, success of Shiny Flakes eventually drew the attention of law enforcement. In January 2015, a woman in Leipzig mistakenly received a package containing illegal drugs. She immediately alerted the police, who launched an investigation. By tracing packages sent from various postal centers, they eventually identified Maximilian. On February 26, 2015, a special operations unit raided his home. They discovered a chaotic room filled with boxes, papers, and over 100 kilograms of drugs. Maximilian was arrested and sentenced to 7 years in a juvenile detention center. During his trial, he cooperated fully with authorities, revealing the intricate details of his operations. However, he refused to disclose the passwords to 2 of his Bitcoin wallets, which potentially held millions of euros. After serving for years and 7 months of his sentence. Maximilian was released in 2019. He returned to an ordinary life, working at an auto repair shop. Yet, his story remains etched in memory as a fascinating example of human ingenuity gone awry. Despite his intelligence and talent, Maximilian chose a path that, while lucrative, ultimately led to his downfall. This tale serves as a universal reminder. Quick and easy success can be alluring, but it often comes at a steep cost. True achievement is built on integrity, hard work, and strong values. Maximilian Schmidt, for all his brilliance, learned this lesson the hard way. Let's begin September 12, 1997. Los Angeles witnessed a criminal act so extraordinary that it was later classified as the largest cash robbery in history. Precisely 12:30 a.m., a group of 6 individuals infiltrated a company specializing in the storage and transport of bank funds. This company was not a bank in the traditional sense, but a secure intermediary that safeguarded money in a heavily fortified vault. PED acted as the bridge between bank branches or as a storage facility during weekends and holidays when banks were unable to hold surplus cash. What set this robbery apart wasn't just the audacious amount stolen, but the meticulous planning and simplicity with which it was carried out. The story behind the heist remains relatively obscure, shielded by a lack of extensive media coverage, even years after the event. This secrecy stems from 2 key factors: the gang's flawless execution, which left no direct evidence of their identities, and the mastermind's unexpected profile as someone completely unsuspecting, a classic wolf in sheep's clothing. As details emerged over the years, the intricate planning, timing, and execution had been hailed as a masterclass in criminal ingenuity. While the robbery itself lasted a mere 30 minutes, its repercussions spanned decades. The robbers executed their plan, attended a party before and after the heist, and returned to their lives as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. The events of that night revealed a fascinating blend of strategy, trust, and the unforeseen vulnerabilities in what was assumed to be an impenetrable system. The seeds of this audacious crime were sown months earlier. At a casual gathering in May 1997, Alan Bass, the eventual mastermind, set a party with his closest friends when he posed a seemingly lighthearted question. What if we became millionaires with a simple, easy plan? His friends, inebriated and amused, dismissed the question as a drunken jest. But Alan persisted, repeating the idea and piquing their curiosity. Someone finally asked, how, setting the stage for Alan to unveil his grand plan. What followed was a detailed outline that he had been secretly crafting. Alan revealed that the target was none other than his workplace, Denbor Armored, a company famed for its high security operations. Initially, the group's reaction was skepticism mixed with ridicule. After all, how could they possibly infiltrate a facility designed to withstand even the most determined intruders? However, as Alan elaborated on his plan, their skepticism began to wane. He presented detailed blueprints, security system layouts, and logistical strategies that highlighted vulnerabilities in the company's operations. The gravity of his proposal shifted the atmosphere in the room from dismissive laughter to serious contemplation. By the end of the night, the group agreed to reconvene and discuss the feasibility of the heist, transforming what began as a joke into a calculated plan for one of the largest robberies in history. The 6 individuals involved in the heist shared a bond forged in childhood. Their friendship was deeply rooted in years of shared experiences, loyalty, and trust. Growing up, they had formed a close-knit group that functioned like a small gang, though not for criminal purposes. They had secret rituals, their own coded language, and even a shared hideout. This unbreakable camaraderie became the foundation for their eventual criminal endeavor. While none of them had a history of serious crimes, they were united by a shared fascination with action movies, particularly those featuring icons like Bruce Lee and Sylvester Stallone. These films fueled their imaginations and inspired a sense of adventure. After high school, the group attempted to join the Navy, motivated by dreams of heroism and camaraderie. However, none of them passed the rigorous entrance exams. Instead, they found work as civilian security contractors, often assigned to guard public and private institutions under police contracts. This shared background in security work provided them with valuable insights into operational procedures and vulnerabilities, which they would later exploit during the heist. Their unique combination of trust, knowledge, and a shared goal made them a formidable team, perfectly suited for the audacious crime Alan had envisioned. Alan Bass worked as a security officer at Denver Armored, a company synonymous with high security, located in a bustling area of Los Angeles. The single-story facility was a fortress-like structure designed to store and transport large sums of cash. Banks often relied on Denver Armored to handle surplus cash during weekends and holidays when their own vaults reached capacity. As a result, the vault at Denver Armored frequently held millions of dollars at any given time. His role as a security officer gave him unparalleled access to the inner workings of the company. His responsibilities included overseeing building safety, inspecting fire extinguishers, monitoring alarms, supervising money transfers, and maintaining the surveillance system. Over time, he developed an intimate understanding of the facility's layout, security protocols, and potential weaknesses. This insider knowledge made him the ideal mastermind for the heist. Alan's position allowed him to observe patterns, identify blind spots in the security system, and devise strategies to circumvent the building's defenses. His familiarity with the staff and their routines further enhanced his ability to plan a seamless operation as he began sharing his insights with the group. They realized that the seemingly impenetrable Denver Armored had exploitable vulnerabilities, setting the stage for their ambitious plan. The preparation phase for the heist spanned 6 months, during which Alan meticulously analyzed every aspect of Denver Armored's security systems. The facility's defenses were divided into 2 main categories: external systems, monitored by the police, and internal systems controlled exclusively by the company. The external systems included cameras positioned around the building's perimeter, while the internal systems consisted of surveillance cameras and alarms within the facility. Alan's primary challenge was to find a way to bypass the external police-monitored cameras, as any breach would trigger an immediate response. To address this, he began building a rapport with the surveillance officer responsible for monitoring these cameras. Under the pretext of casual conversations during coffee breaks, Alan gathered valuable information about the system's operations and limitations. Initially, he considered recruiting the surveillance officer into the plan, but ultimately decided against it, as his friends believed the officer's weak personality made him a liability. Instead, Alan devised a plan to subtly manipulate the camera angles, creating small blind spots near the entrances. He also proposed repositioning some of the internal cameras, claiming it would improve security by eliminating existing blind spots. Management approved these changes, unwittingly aiding the gang's preparations for the heist, while the external cameras posed a significant challenge. The internal surveillance system proved to be a more manageable obstacle. Alan discovered that the internal cameras operated on a closed-circuit system exclusive to the company, with no direct connection to the police. This meant that once inside the building, the gang could disable the internal system without triggering an external alarm. Alan also identified specific pathways through the facility where the gang could move without being recorded. To further minimize risks, he made subtle adjustments to the internal camera's angles under the guise of improving their coverage. These changes created a clear route for the gang to navigate the building undetected. Another critical aspect of the plan involved duplicating all necessary keys, including those for the vault, surveillance room, and main entrances. Allen's position as a trusted employee allowed him to access these keys without arousing suspicion. With every detail meticulously planned, the group felt confident in their ability to execute the heist. Allen's intimate knowledge of the facility's security systems and his ability to manipulate them were instrumental in creating a foolproof strategy. The gang's preparations reached their final stages, and the countdown to the robbery began. As the date of the heist approached, the gang focused on fine-tuning their plan and addressing potential contingencies. They rented a large truck from a company known for its oversized vehicles, ensuring the license plates would remain obscured by the vehicle's design. This will prevent the police-monitored cameras from capturing any identifying information. To further minimize their exposure, the gang decided to execute the heist during a time when the building was least likely to be staffed. Allen's knowledge of the facility's schedule allowed them to identify the optimal window of opportunity. The plan also included measures to erase any evidence of their presence. They would disable the surveillance system, wipe the recordings, and lock up the building after completing the heist, leaving no trace of their activities. The gang rehearsed their roles and practiced their movements to ensure a smooth execution. Their preparations were so thorough that they even accounted for the possibility of being spotted by passing vehicles or pedestrians. By the time the night of the heist arrived, every detail had been meticulously planned, leaving nothing to chance. The gang was ready to carry out one of the most audacious crimes in history. The heist began in the early hours of September 12, 1997. The gang arrived at Denver armored under the cover of darkness, using the blind spots Allen had created to avoid detection by the external cameras. They quickly gained entry to the building using the duplicated keys and moved swiftly to disable the internal alarm system. Allen's adjustments to the camera angles ensured that their movements went unrecorded. Once inside, the gang made their way to the vault, where millions of dollars in cash were stored. They worked efficiently, loading the money into the rental truck with precision and speed. The entire operation lasted just 30 minutes, a testament to their meticulous planning and rehearsals. After securing the cash, they carefully erased any evidence of their presence, wiping the surveillance recordings and resetting the alarm system. They locked up the building and left the scene as if nothing had happened. The gang then returned to their respective lives, blending seamlessly back into their routines. Remarkably, they even attended a party that same night, acting as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. Their ability to maintain their composure and avoid suspicion was a testament to their discipline and preparation. The discovery of the robbery shocked the staff at Denver, armored, and law enforcement officials. The sheer scale of the theft and the lack of evidence made it one of the most challenging cases investigators had ever encountered. Despite their efforts, the police were unable to identify the perpetrators or recover the stolen money. The gang's meticulous planning and execution had left no direct leads for investigators to follow. The case quickly gained notoriety as the largest cash robbery in history, but media coverage remained surprisingly limited. The secrecy surrounding the heist was partly due to the embarrassment it caused for Denver armored and law enforcement. The company's reputation as a high-security facility had been severely undermined, and the police faced criticism for their inability to prevent or solve the crime. Over the years, details about the heist gradually emerged through documentaries and interviews with those involved. However, many aspects of the case remained shrouded in mystery, with new revelations occasionally coming to light. The gang's ability to maintain their anonymity and avoid capture has become a legendary tale of criminal ingenuity. The Denver armored heist remains a fascinating case study in the world of crime. It highlights the vulnerabilities in even the most secure systems and the lengths to which individuals can go to exploit them. The gang's ability to execute Such a complex plan without leaving any evidence of their identities has earned them a place in the annals of criminal history, while their motivations and actions were undeniably criminal. Their ingenuity and discipline have been acknowledged as remarkable. The story serves as a cautionary tale for security professionals and a reminder of the importance of vigilance and innovation in the face of evolving threats. For the 6 individuals involved, the heist was not just a crime, but a test of their trust, loyalty, and ingenuity. Their bond as childhood friends and their shared experiences provided the foundation for their success. As new details continue to emerge, the Denver armored heist remains a compelling narrative of ambition, strategy, and the human capacity for both creativity and deception. It is a story that will undoubtedly continue to captivate and intrigue for generations to come. City of Los Angeles glimmered like a jewel under the California sun, a place where dreams were made and broken in equal measure. It was a city of contrasts. Luxury sports cars zoomed past homeless encampments, and the mansions of Hollywood elites stood just miles away from struggling neighborhoods. In this world of glitz and glamour, where fame was the ultimate currency, a group of teenagers dared to dream bigger than most. But their dreams weren't of red carpets or Oscar awards. They were of fast money, stolen treasures, and the thrill of outsmarting the rich and famous. At the center of this story was Nicholas Prugo, a young man with a fragile ego and a burning desire to be someone important. Born and raised in the San Fernando Valley, Nicholas grew up in the shadow of Hollywood's towering success. He wasn't rich, he wasn't particularly confident, and he certainly wasn't famous. But he had one thing, an unshakable belief that he was destined for greatness. Nicholas's journey into the world of crime began innocently enough. He met Rachel Lee, a girl who was everything he wasn't: confident, charismatic, and fearless. Rachel had an obsession with celebrities and their lavish lifestyles. She introduced Nicholas to a world he had only seen from afar. Together, they started small, stealing from unlocked cars in the upscale neighborhoods of Calabasas. It was almost too easy. People in these areas were so trusting, so careless, that they often left their cars unlocked with valuables inside. Nicholas and Rachel would drive around at night, scouting for opportunities. One night, they stumbled upon a brand new Porsche with the keys still in the ignition. The car was worth $75,000, and Rachel saw it as a sign. She turned to Nicholas and said, "This is our chance. Let's take it." Nicholas hesitated. Fear of getting caught gnawed at him, but Rachel's confidence was infectious. She assured him that they wouldn't get caught, and against his better judgment, Nicholas agreed. They drove off in the stolen Porsche, their hearts racing with adrenaline. To avoid detection, they swapped the license plates with those of a similar car, a trick they had learned from watching crime shows. For the next year, Nicholas and Rachel continued their spree, stealing cars and valuables from unsuspecting victims. But as their confidence grew, so did their ambitions. They wanted more and more money, more excitement, more recognition. Their first big break came when they targeted the home of a YouTuber named Eden Sassoon. Eden had posted on MySpace about traveling for 11 days, leaving his home unattended. Nicholas and Rachel saw this as the perfect opportunity. Using the information Eden had shared online, they located his address and scouted the area. On the night of the robbery, they found the back door unlocked, the stroke of luck that felt almost too good to be true. Inside, they found $3,000 in cash and other valuables. It was their biggest haul yet, and it fueled their desire for more. But this was just the beginning. Nicholas and Rachel soon realized that the internet was a goldmine of information. Celebrities and influencers often shared details about their lives online, from their travel plans to the layout of their homes. This made them easy targets. Their next victim was Paris Hilton, the heiress and reality TV star. Paris had posted a photo on Instagram wearing a $4 million diamond ring, and Nicholas and Rachel knew they had to act fast. They spent weeks monitoring her movements, studying her routines, and planning their heist. When the time came, they executed their plan with military precision. Disguised as police officers, they entered Paris's apartment, tied her up, and made off with millions of dollars worth of jewelry. The Paris Hilton robbery was a turning point for Nicholas and Rachel. It catapulted them into the big leagues, but it also put them on the radar of law enforcement. The police launched a massive investigation, and Nicholas knew they had to be more careful. But the thrill of the heist was addictive, and they couldn't stop. They continued to target celebrities, using the same methods, scouting their targets online, studying their routines, and striking when the time was right. Each robbery was more daring than the last, and each time they walked away with more loot. But as their crimes grew bolder, so did the risks. Nicholas began to feel the pressure. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, paranoid that the police were closing in. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. She thrived on the adrenaline, the rush of outsmarting the rich and famous. Their dynamic began to shift, and cracks started to form in their partnership. Nicholas wanted to slow down, but Rachel was hungry for more. Their next target was actress Adrienne Patridge. Adrienne had posted about attending the Oscars, leaving her home empty. Nicholas and Rachel saw this as another golden opportunity. They broke into her mansion, stealing designer clothes, jewelry, and cash. But this time, they were caught on camera. The surveillance footage was grainy, but it was enough to put the police on their trail. Nicholas knew they were playing a dangerous game, but he couldn't bring himself to stop. The final straw came when they targeted Lindsay Lohan. Lindsay was one of the most famous actresses in the world. In her home was a treasure trove of valuables. Nicholas and Rachel, along with a new accomplice named Diana Tamayo, broke into Lindsay's house and made off with a fortune in stolen goods. But this time, the police were ready. They had been tracking Nicholas and Rachel for months, and they were closing in. Nicholas's world began to unravel. His accomplices turned on each other, and the police were hot on his trail. He knew it was only a matter of time before he was caught. But even as the walls closed in, Nicholas couldn't shake the feeling that he was destined for something greater. He had started this journey as a nobody, but now he was one of the most wanted criminals in Los Angeles. For Nicholas, that was a kind of fame, just not the kind he had imagined. The story of Nicholas Prugo and Rachel Lee wasn't just about theft, it was about ambition, obsession, and the intoxicating allure of fame. By 2009, their gang, which would later be dubbed the Bling Ring by the media, had become a well-oiled machine. They weren't just stealing from celebrities, they were living like them. Designer clothes, luxury handbags, and expensive jewelry became their everyday attire. They flaunted their stolen goods on social media, posting pictures of themselves, draped in Chanel, Gucci, and Louis Vuitton. To the outside world, they looked like young, successful socialites living the high life. But behind the glitz and glamour was a dangerous game of cat and mouse with the law. Nicholas and Cleese and Rachel's partnership was the backbone of the Bling Ring. Nicholas was the brains of the operation, meticulously planning each heist and studying their targets' every move. Rachel, on the other hand, was the fearless leader, the one who pushed them to take bigger risks. Together, they were unstoppable. But as their fame grew, so did their egos. Nicholas began to see himself as a mastermind, a criminal genius who could outsmart anyone. Rachel, meanwhile, became increasingly reckless, convinced that they were invincible. Their next target was Orlando Bloom, the British heartthrob known for his roles in Pirates of the Caribbean and The Lord of the Rings. Orlando's home was a fortress with high walls and state-of-the-art security systems. But Nicholas had done his homework. He knew that Orlando was out of town. He knew, and he had studied the layout of the property using Google Maps. On the night of the heist, Nicholas, Rachel, and their new accomplice, Diana Tamayo, arrived at Orlando's mansion dressed in all black, their faces covered with scarves. They scaled the fence and made their way to the backyard, where they found an unlocked glass door. It was almost too easy. Inside, the house was a treasure trove of luxury. Designer clothes hung in the closets, Rolex watches gleamed in the drawers, and stacks of cash were scattered throughout the rooms. Nicholas and his crew moved quickly, filling their bags with as much loot as they could carry. But as they were leaving, Nicholas noticed something that made his blood run cold. Surveillance camera pointed directly at them. He knew they had been caught on tape, but there was no time to worry about it now. They fled the scene, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The next morning, Orlando returned home to find his house ransacked. The police were called, and the surveillance footage was reviewed. The images were blurry, but they clearly showed 3 figures entering and leaving the property. The media quickly picked up the story, and the bling ring was thrust into the spotlight. For Nicholas, this was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, he loved the attention. For the first time in his life, he felt important. On the other hand, he knew that the police were closing in. As the pressure mounted, cracks began to form in the bling ring. Nicholas and Rachel's relationship grew tense, with each blaming the other for their close calls with the law. Diana, who had joined the group hoping for a taste of the high life, began to have second thoughts. She had never imagined that things would get this dangerous. Meanwhile, the media frenzy surrounding the bling ring only grew. News outlets dubbed them the Hollywood Hills burglars, and their exploits became the talk of the town. But the bling ring wasn't just about Nicholas, Rachel, and Diana. There were others involved: Alexis Nyers, her sister Gabby, and their friend Tess. Alexis was a wannabe actress with dreams of fame and fortune. She had grown up in the shadow of Hollywood, surrounded by the glitz and glamour of the entertainment industry. And like Nicholas and Rachel, Alexis wasn't content with stealing from celebrities. She wanted to be one. Alexis's involvement with the bling ring began innocently enough. She had met Nicholas at a nightclub, and the two quickly hit it off. Nicholas, always the charmer, told her that he was a celebrity stylist and offered to help her break into the industry. Alexis was flattered and eager to impress. When Nicholas invited her to join him and Rachel on a heist, she didn't hesitate. It was her chance to live like a star, even if only for a night. But as the heists grew more daring, Alexis began to feel the weight of what they were doing. She had always dreamed of fame, but this wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. Media was painting the bling ring as a group of spoiled, entitled kids who thought they were above the law. Alexis knew that if they were caught, her dreams of becoming an actress would be over. The final straw came when the bling ring targeted Lindsay Lohan. Lindsay was one of the most famous actresses in the world, and her home was a treasure trove of valuables. Nicholas, Rachel, and Diana broke into Lindsay's house and made off with a fortune in stolen goods. But this time, the police were ready. They had been tracking the bling ring for months, and they were closing in. Nicholas's world began to unravel. His accomplices turned on each other, and the police were hot on his trail. He knew it was only a matter of time before he was caught. But even as the walls closed in, Nicholas couldn't shake the feeling that he was destined for something greater. He had started this journey as a nobody, but now he was one of the most wanted criminals in Los Angeles. For Nicholas, that was a kind of fame, just not the kind he had imagined. The bling ring's reign of terror couldn't last forever. By the summer of 2009, the walls were closing in. The police had been piecing together evidence for months, and the media's relentless coverage of the burglaries had turned the group into household names. But fame as they would soon learn, was a double-edged sword for every admiring fan who saw them as modern-day Robin Hoods. There were 10 others who viewed them as entitled criminals who needed to be brought to justice. The pressure was mounting, and the cracks within the group were beginning to show. Nicholas Prugo, once the confident mastermind, was now a bundle of nerves. He had always been the one to plan the heists, to study the targets, and to ensure that every detail was perfect. But the Lindsay Lohan robbery had shaken him. The surveillance footage from Orlando Bloom's mansion had been released to the public. While the images were blurry, Nicholas knew it was only a matter of time before someone recognized him. He began to distance himself from Rachel Lee, the fearless leader who had once been his closest ally. Rachel, however, seemed unfazed. She was still riding the high of their success, convinced that they were untouchable. The turning point came when Alexis Nyers, one of the newer members of the Bling Ring, decided she had had enough. Alexis had joined the group hoping for a taste of the high life, but the reality of their crimes had begun to weigh heavily on her conscience. She had always dreamed of fame, but this wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. The media was painting the Bling Ring as a group of spoiled, entitled kids who thought they were above the law. Alexis knew that if they were caught, her dreams of becoming an actress would be over. One night, after a particularly tense argument with Nicholas, Alexis made a decision that would change everything. She picked up the phone and called the police. In a trembling voice, she told them everything she knew about the Bling Ring, their heists, their targets, and their methods. She even gave them Nicholas's name. It was a betrayal that would send shockwaves through the group, but for Alexis, it was a desperate attempt to save herself. The police acted quickly. Armed with the information Alexis had provided, they obtained a warrant to search Nicholas's home. When they arrived, they found a treasure trove of stolen goods, designer clothes, luxury handbags, and expensive jewelry. Nicholas was arrested on the spot, his face pale with shock. He had always known that this day might come, but he had never imagined it would happen like this. As news of Nicholas's arrest spread, the rest of the Bling Ring began to panic. Rachel Lee, who had always been the most confident member of the group, was now a nervous wreck. She knew that it was only a matter of time before the police came. For her, Diana Tamayo, who had joined the group hoping for a taste of the high life, was filled with regret. She had never imagined that things would get this dangerous. The police wasted no time in rounding up the rest of the group. Rachel was arrested at her home in Las Vegas, where she had fled in a desperate attempt to escape the law. Diana was picked up at her apartment, her face streaked with tears as she was led away in handcuffs. Even Alexis, who had betrayed the group to save herself, wasn't spared. The police had found evidence linking her to the Lindsay Lohan robbery, and she was arrested alongside the others. The media frenzy surrounding the arrests was unlike anything Los Angeles had ever seen. The Bling Ring, once a group of anonymous thieves, were now the most talked about criminals in the country. News outlets scrambled to uncover every detail of their lives, from their childhoods to their motivations. The group's mugshots were splashed across the front pages of newspapers, their faces a stark contrast to the glamorous images they had once posted on social media. For Nicholas, the reality of his situation was beginning to sink in. He had always seen himself as a mastermind, a criminal genius who could outsmart anyone. But now, sitting in a jail cell, he felt like a fool. He had risked everything for a taste of fame, and now he had nothing to show for it. The only thing he had left was his pride, and even that was slipping away. The trials that followed were a media circus. Each member of the Bling Ring was charged with multiple counts of burglary, and the evidence against them was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, stolen goods, and testimonies from their accomplices painted a damning picture. Nicholas, who had once been the confident leader of the group, was now a broken man. He pleaded guilty to the charges against him, hoping that his cooperation would earn him a lighter sentence. Rachel, on the other hand, refused to back down. She maintained her innocence, claiming that she had been coerced into participating in the heists, but the evidence against her was too strong, and she was eventually convicted and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Diana, who had always been the most reluctant member of the group, received a lighter sentence of 3 years of probation and community service. Alexis, who had betrayed the group to save herself, was sentenced to 6 months in prison. But even as she served her time, she couldn't escape the media's relentless scrutiny. Her mugshot became one of the most iconic images of the Bling Ring saga, a stark reminder of the consequences of her actions. For the members of the Bling Ring, the arrests marked the end of an era. They had started out as a group of teenagers with big dreams and even bigger ambitions, but their quest for fame and fortune had led them down a dark path, one that ended in betrayal, arrests, and shattered dreams. The fall of the Bling Ring was as dramatic as its rise. By the time the dust settled, the group that had once been the talk of Hollywood was now a cautionary tale. The media, which had once glorified their exploits, now painted them as entitled criminals who had gotten what they deserved. But for the members of the Bling Ring, the aftermath of their arrests was a time of reflection, regret, and, for some, redemption. Nicholas Prugo, the self-proclaimed mastermind of the group, was the first to face the consequences of his actions. After pleading guilty to multiple counts of burglary, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. But for Nicholas, the hardest part wasn't the time behind bars, it was the realization that he had thrown away his life for nothing. He had always dreamed of fame, but now he was infamous, his name forever associated with crime and betrayal, in prison. Nicholas had plenty of time to think about what had gone wrong. He thought about Rachel Lee, his former partner in crime, Kay, and how their friendship had disintegrated under the weight of their crimes. He thought about Alexis Nyers, the girl who had betrayed him to save herself, and wondered if he would have done the same in her position. Most of all, he thought about his family, the people who had stood by him even when he had let them down. When Nicholas was released from prison after serving just 1 year of his sentence, was a changed man. He knew that he could never undo the damage he had done, but he was determined to make amends. He started by reaching out to his victims, apologizing for the pain he had caused. It wasn't easy. Many of them wanted nothing to do with him, but Nicholas was determined to prove that he was more than just a criminal. Rachel Lee, on the other hand, struggled to come to terms with her new reality. She had always been the fearless leader of the Bling Ring, the one who pushed the group to take bigger risks. But now, sitting in a prison cell, she felt like a shadow of her former self. Confidence that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a deep sense of regret. Rachel's time in prison was a wake-up call. She realized that she had been chasing the wrong kind of fame, the kind that came at the expense of others. When she was released after serving 4 years of her sentence, she was determined to turn her life around. She cut ties with her old friends and started over, hoping to leave her criminal past behind. Diana DeMaio, the most reluctant member of the Bling Ring, was the only one who managed to avoid prison time. She was sentenced to 3 years of probation and 60 days of community service, relatively light punishment compared to the others. But for Diana, the emotional toll of her involvement in the group was punishment enough. She had joined the Bling Ring hoping for a taste of the high life, but the reality of their crimes had left her feeling empty and disillusioned. After her probation ended, Kana moved away from Los Angeles, hoping to start a new life far from the spotlight. She found work as a waitress and tried to put the past behind her. But the memories of what she had done and what she had lost haunted her. Alexis Nyers, the girl who had betrayed the group to save herself, faced her own set of challenges after her release from prison. Her mugshot had become one of the most iconic images of the Bling Ring saga, and she struggled to escape the stigma of her criminal past. But Alexis was determined to rebuild her life. She reconnected with her family and began working on a memoir, hoping to tell her side of the story. In 2010, Alexis's memoir, I'm Not Sorry, was published, and it quickly became a bestseller. The book was a raw and honest account of her involvement in the Bling Ring, and it offered a glimpse into the world of fame, obsession, and crime that had consumed her. For Alexis, writing the book was a form of therapy, a way to make sense of the choices she had made and the consequences she had faced. The media, which had once vilified the members of the Bling Ring, now began to see them in a different light. Nicholas, Rachel, Diana, and Alexis were no longer just criminals. They were human beings who had made mistakes and were trying to move on with their lives. Documentaries and interviews explored the psychological and social factors that had led them down the path of crime, and many began to see the Bling Ring as a product of a culture that glorified fame and materialism, but not everyone was willing to forgive and forget. The celebrities who had been targeted by the Bling Ring, Paris Hilton, Lindsay Lohan, Orlando Bloom, and others, were still dealing with the aftermath of the burglaries. For them, the thefts weren't just about the loss of material possessions. They were a violation of their privacy and sense of security. Paris Hilton, who had been one of the Bling Ring's most high-profile victims, spoke out about the impact the burglaries had had on her life. It's not just about the things they stole, she said in an interview. It's about the feeling of being violated, of knowing that someone was in your home, going through your things, something you never really get over. Lindsay Lohan, who had also been targeted by the group, echoed Paris's sentiments. It's a scary feeling, she said. You start to question everything who you can trust, whether you're safe in your own home. It changes you. For the members of the Bling Ring, hearing these words was a painful reminder of the damage they had caused. They had been so focused on their own desires for fame, for money, for excitement, they had never stopped to consider the impact their actions would have on others. But even as they grappled with their guilt, the members of the Bling Ring found ways to move forward. Nicholas began working with at-risk youth, sharing his story in the hopes of preventing others from making the same mistakes he had. Rachel started a small business, using the skills she had learned in prison to build a new life for herself. Diana focused on her family, determined to be a better role model for her children, and Alexis continued to write, using her voice to advocate for criminal justice reform. The story of the Bling Ring is a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession, greed, and the pursuit of fame at any cost. But it's also a story of redemption, of people who made terrible mistakes and found the strength to rebuild their lives. For Nicholas, Rachel, Diana, and Alexis, the road to redemption was long and difficult, but it was a journey they were determined to take. The story of the Bling Ring didn't end with the arrests, cues, or even the personal redemptions of its members. It became a cultural phenomenon, a cautionary tale that resonated far beyond the borders of Los Angeles. The group's exploits were immortalized in books, documentaries, and even a major Hollywood film, turning their crimes into a spectacle that captivated audiences around the world. But beneath the glitz and glamour of their story lies a deeper lesson about the dangers of obsession, the allure of fame, and the consequences of living in a world where image is everything. In 2013, director Sofia Coppola brought the Bling Ring story to the big screen with her film The Bling Ring, starring Emma Watson as Alexis Nyers and a talented ensemble cast. The movie offered a stylized, almost dreamlike portrayal of the group's rise and fall. It was a critical and commercial success, sparking conversations about celebrity culture, materialism, the lengths people would go to for a taste of the high life. For the real-life members of the Bling Ring, the film was a surreal experience, Seeing their lives dramatized on screen was both flattering and unsettling. A reminder of how their actions had been transformed into entertainment. Alexis Nyers, whose character was central to the film, had mixed feelings about its portrayal of her. While she appreciated the attention and the opportunity to share her story, she also felt that the movie glossed over some of the darker aspects of her experience. "It's strange to see your life turned into a movie," she said in an interview. "There's a part of you that wants to be proud, but there's also a part of you that feels exposed, like people are judging you all over again." For Nicholas Prugo, the film was a painful reminder of the mistakes he had made. He watched it with a sense of detachment, as if he were viewing the life of someone else. "It's hard to watch something like that and not feel regret," he admitted. "See all the things you did wrong, all the people you hurt, and you wonder how you could have been so blind." The film also reignited public interest in the bling ring, prompting a wave of documentaries and interviews that explored the psychological and social factors behind their crimes. Many of these projects focused on the role of social media in the group's rise to infamy. The bling ring had used platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to track their targets, plan their heists, and flaunt their stolen goods. In doing so, they had exposed the dark side of the digital age world, where privacy is an illusion, and fame is just a click away. The media's fascination with the bling ring also highlighted the blurred lines between crime and entertainment. For some, the group's story was a thrilling tale of rebellion and excess, modern-day Bonnie and Clyde for the Instagram generation. For others, it was a sobering reminder of the dangers of celebrity worship and the toxic allure of materialism. The bling ring had been driven by a desire to live like the stars they idolized, but in the end, they became a cautionary tale about the cost of chasing fame at any cost. But the legacy of the bling ring isn't just about their crimes or the media frenzy that followed. It's also about the lessons we can learn from their story. For many, the group's downfall serves as a reminder of the importance of self-awareness, accountability, and the dangers of losing sight of what really matters. Nicholas Prugo, who has spent years reflecting on his actions, hopes that his story can serve as a warning to others. "I want people to understand that fame and money aren't everything," he said. "They're not worth sacrificing your integrity, your relationships, or your freedom. I learned that the hard way, and I hope others can learn from my mistakes." Rachel Lee, who has largely stayed out of the public eye since her release from prison, echoes Nicholas's sentiments. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of being famous, of having everything you ever wanted," she said. "But the truth is, those things don't make you happy. What really matters is the people you love and the life you build for yourself." For Alexis Nyers, the legacy of the bling ring is a complicated one. While she regrets the choices she made, she also sees her experience as an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. "I've made a lot of mistakes, but I've also learned a lot about myself," she said. "I've learned that true happiness comes from within, not from the things you own or the image you project." The bling ring story also raises important questions about the role of celebrity, its culture, in shaping our values and aspirations. In a world where social media influencers and reality TV stars are often held up as role models, it's easy to lose sight of what really matters. The bling ring's obsession with fame and materialism is a reflection of a larger cultural trend, one that prioritizes image over substance and rewards superficiality over authenticity. But the story of the bling ring isn't just a critique of celebrity culture, it's also a testament to the power of redemption. Despite their mistakes, the members of the group have found ways to rebuild their lives and move forward. Nicholas has become an advocate for at-risk youth, using his story to inspire others to make better choices. Rachel has started a small business, focusing on her passion for fashion and design. Alexis has embraced her role as a writer and activist, using her voice to advocate for criminal justice reform. Their journeys are a reminder that no matter how far we fall, it's never too late to turn our lives around. The Bling Ring story is a cautionary tale, but it's also a story of resilience, growth, the enduring power of the human spirit. The story of the Bling Ring is one of ambition, obsession, and the relentless pursuit of fame. It's a tale that began with a group of teenagers who dreamed of living like the celebrities they idolized, and ended with their spectacular downfall. From their early days of stealing from unlocked cars to their audacious heists targeting Hollywood's elite, the Bling Ring captivated the public's imagination and exposed the dark side of celebrity culture. But as the dust settled and the media frenzy faded, what remained was a sobering reminder of the consequences of greed, betrayal, and the dangers of chasing fame at any cost. The Bling Ring's rise to infamy was fueled by a combination of ambition, opportunity, and the intoxicating allure of celebrity. Nicholas Prugo, the self-proclaimed mastermind, Kay, and Rachel Lee, the fearless leader, were the driving forces behind the group's crimes. They used social media to track their targets, study their routines, and plan their heists with military precision. Their targets Paris Hilton, Lindsay Lohan, Orlando Bloom, and others were more than just victims. They were symbols of the glamorous lifestyle the Bling Ring so desperately wanted to emulate. But as their crimes grew bolder, so did the risks. The group's downfall was as dramatic as their rise, marked by betrayal, arrests, and the harsh reality of life behind bars. Nicholas, Rachel, Alexis Nyers, Diana Tamayo, and the other members of the Bling Ring were forced to confront the consequences of their actions, both legally and personally. Their story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that the pursuit of fame and fortune often comes at a steep price. The aftermath of the Bling Ring's crimes was a time of reflection and redemption for its members. Nicholas, who had once dreamed of being a criminal mastermind, found himself grappling with guilt and regret. After serving time in prison, he dedicated himself to helping at-risk youth, using his story as a warning to others. Kayla's leader, who had always been so confident, struggled to rebuild her life after her release. She started a small business and tried to leave her criminal past behind, but the scars of her mistakes remained. Alexis Nyers, whose betrayal of the group had marked the beginning of the end, found redemption through writing and activism. Her memoir, I'm Not Sorry, offered a raw and honest account of her involvement in the Bling Ring and became a bestseller. She used her platform to advocate for criminal justice reform and to share the lessons she had learned from her mistakes. Diana Tamayo, the most reluctant member of the group, moved away from Los Angeles and focused on her family, determined to build a better life for herself and her children. The Bling Ring story also had a profound impact on their victims. For Paris Hilton, Lindsay Lohan, and the other celebrities who were targeted, the burglaries were more than just a violation of their privacy. They were a reminder of the dangers of living in the public eye. The thefts left them feeling vulnerable and exposed, a stark contrast to the glamorous image they projected to the world. But the legacy of the Bling Ring extends far beyond the individuals involved. Their story has become a cultural phenomenon, immortalized in books, documentaries, and films. It has sparked conversations about celebrity culture, materialism, and the dangers of living in a world where image is everything. The Bling Ring's crimes were a product of their time, a reflection of a society that glorifies fame and wealth above all else. In the years since their downfall, the members of the Bling Ring have tried to move on with their lives. They have faced their mistakes, sought redemption, and worked to rebuild what they had lost. But their story serves as a reminder that the pursuit of fame and fortune often comes at a steep price. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession, the allure of celebrity, and the importance of staying true to oneself. As we reflect on the Bling Ring story, it's important to remember that fame and wealth are not the keys to happiness. True success comes from within, from the relationships we build, the values we uphold, and the lives we lead. The Bling Ring's journey is a reminder that the things we chase, whether it's fame, money, or material possessions, aren't often fleeting. What truly matters is the legacy we leave behind and the impact we have on the world around us. The story of the Bling Ring is one that will continue to captivate and intrigue for years to come. It's a tale of ambition, obsession, and the relentless pursuit of fame, but it's also a story of redemption, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The members of the Bling Ring made terrible mistakes, but they also found the strength to rebuild their lives and move forward. As we close this chapter, let's remember the lessons their story teaches us. Fame and fortune may be alluring, but they are not worth sacrificing our integrity, our relationships, or our freedom. True success comes from within, from the choices we make and the lives we lead. The Bling Ring story is a cautionary tale, but it's also a reminder that no matter how far we fall, it's never too late to turn our lives around. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the rise and fall of the Bling Ring. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating tales. And if you're interested in exploring another fascinating story, check out our video on insert related topic here. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and remember, true success is about more than just fame and fortune. See you tomorrow. The kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you wish you'd never left the warmth of your home. Steve tightened his grip on the steering wheel as he pulled into the driveway of his suburban Oklahoma City home. His wife, Helen, sitting quietly beside him. They had just returned from a rare night out, a movie followed by a quiet dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant. It was their day off, a chance to unwind from the stress of Steve's demanding job as the vice president of a local bank. Helen had been quiet for most of the ride home, lost in thought, but Steve didn't mind. He was just glad to have spent the evening with her, away from the pressures of work. As they entered the garage, Steve pressed the button to close the door behind them, the mechanical worry filling the silence. But before the door could fully close, another car sped in behind them, its headlights blinding in the rearview mirror. Steve froze, his heart pounding as two men stepped out of the car. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by hats and scarves. One of them approached Steve's window, tapping on the glass with the barrel of a gun. "Mr. Steve," the man said, his voice calm but firm, "we're from the federal police. We need you to come with us. This is a matter of your safety and your life." Helen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but Steve remained silent, his mind racing. He knew this wasn't right. Federal officers wouldn't approach him like this in the middle of the night in his own garage. But before he could react, the man opened the car door and pulled Steve out, shoving him against the wall. Helen screamed, but the other man was already at her side, his gun trained on her. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," the first man said, his voice low and menacing. Steve's mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Were these men? What did they want from him? But why had they chosen him, of all people? As the men forced Steve and Helen into their house, Steve couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Little did he know, this night would unravel a story of crime, betrayal, and a criminal mastermind whose brilliance was matched only by his ruthlessness. This was the night that would change everything. The man who had orchestrated this nightmare was Terry Connor. It's a name that would soon become synonymous with fear and infamy. Terry's journey into the world of crime had begun decades earlier. In a small California town where he had grown up as the quiet, skinny kid who always seemed to be the target of bullies. Born in 1944 to a modest family, Terry had always felt out of place, as if he didn't belong in the world around him. He was intelligent, far more so than his peers. But his sharp mind was often overshadowed by his social awkwardness and the mild mental disorder that made it difficult for him to connect with others. Terry's parents did their best to provide for him, but they were struggling to make ends meet, and their attention was often divided between work and their other children. As a result, Terry spent much of his childhood alone, lost in his own thoughts and dreams. It was during these solitary moments that he began to develop a fascination with puzzles and problem solving. He would spend hours analyzing complex problems, breaking them down into smaller, more manageable parts until he found a solution. This skill would later become the foundation of his criminal career, but for now was just a way for Terry to escape the harsh realities of his life. As he grew older, Terry's intelligence and analytical mind began to manifest in more sinister ways. He started small, stealing from local businesses and experimenting with different methods of breaking and entering. At first, it was just a way to prove to himself that he could outsmart the system, but as his confidence grew, so did his ambitions. By the time he was in his early 20s, Terry had set his sights on a much bigger target: banks. His first major heist was a small bank in Arizona, a place he had chosen because of its minimal security and remote location. Terry spent weeks planning the operation, studying the bank's layout, the routines of its employees, and the weaknesses in its security systems. When the day finally came, Terry executed the plan flawlessly, slipping into the bank unnoticed and making off with a modest sum of money. It wasn't a life-changing amount, but for Terry, was a victory of proof of concept that he could pull off something far more ambitious. The success of the heist fueled Terry's ambition, and he began to dream bigger, envisioning a life of wealth and power achieved through carefully planned heists. But his early successes also attracted the attention of law enforcement, and it wasn't long before Terry found himself behind bars. For most people, prison would have been the end of the road, but for Terry, it was just the beginning. Behind bars, he honed his skills, networked with other criminals, and laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in American history. It was during his time in prison that Terry met Joseph, a hardened criminal with a reputation for violence and fearlessness. Joseph, born in 1939 in Philadelphia, had a long history of highway robberies and scams. Like Terry, who relied on his intellect and planning, Joseph was the muscled enforcer who could intimidate and overpower anyone who stood in his way. The two formed an unlikely partnership, with Terry as the mastermind and Joseph as the executor of their plans. Together, they began to recruit other criminals, assembling a gang that would help them carry out their heists. Terry's meticulous nature and Joseph's brute force made them a formidable team. They developed a system for their operations, which involved kidnapping bank managers and their families, forcing the managers to open the banks, and then making a swift escape. The gang operated with strict rules. No children were to be involved. In the kidnappings, no harm was to come to the hostages, and all members were to disguise themselves to avoid identification. After each heist, the gang would split up, making it difficult for law enforcement to track them. Terry also insisted that the stolen money be converted into diamonds, which were easier to hide and transport. This level of planning and discipline allowed them to carry out multiple heists without getting caught. But it also made them a prime target for law enforcement agencies determined to bring them to justice. The heist in Oklahoma City on December 28, 1982, was one of their most audacious plans. Steve, the bank's vice president, was the perfect target. He had no children, lived in a quiet neighborhood, and had access to the bank's security systems. Terry and his gang executed the plan flawlessly, holding Steve and Helen hostage overnight and forcing Steve to open the bank the next morning. The gang managed to steal $270,000 in just 30 minutes, leaving no trace of their identities. However, Steve's quick thinking allowed him to alert the police after the gang had left, leading to a massive manhunt. The police were baffled by the sophistication of the operation and realized they were dealing with a highly organized and experienced criminal group. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a pattern of similar heists across multiple states, all bearing the hallmarks of Terry and Joseph's methods. The detectives assigned to the case knew they were up against a formidable adversary, but they were determined to bring the gang to justice. The investigation led them to Terry's girlfriend in California, where they hoped to find clues about his whereabouts. However, Terry's meticulous planning and ability to stay one step ahead of the law made it difficult for the police to track him down. Terry and Joseph's partnership was the stuff of legends, a perfect blend of brains and brawn that made them nearly unstoppable. After their initial meeting in prison, the two quickly realized they complemented each other in ways that neither had experienced before. Terry, with his razor-sharp intellect and knack for meticulous planning, provided the blueprints for their operations. Joseph, on the other hand, brought the raw power and fearlessness needed to execute those plans without hesitation. Together, they began to build a criminal empire, recruiting a small but loyal group of accomplices who shared their vision of wealth and power. The gang's first major operation outside of prison was a bank heist in a small town in Nevada. Terry had spent weeks studying the bank's security systems, identifying weaknesses, and mapping out escape routes. Joseph, meanwhile, handled the recruitment of the team, selecting individuals who were skilled, reliable, and, most importantly, willing to follow orders without question. The heist itself was a masterpiece of precision and timing. Terry and his team entered the bank just as it opened, disguised as maintenance workers. They quickly overpowered the security guards and took the bank manager hostage, forcing him to open the vault. Within minutes, they had emptied the vault of its contents, stuffing the money into duffel bags and making their escape through a back alley. The entire operation took less than 15 minutes, and by the time the police arrived, the gang was long gone. The success of the heist solidified Terry and Joseph's reputation as the most dangerous criminals in the country. And it wasn't long before they began to attract the attention of law enforcement agencies at the highest levels. But Terry and Joseph weren't content to rest on their laurels. They knew that the key to staying ahead of the law was to constantly evolve and adapt their methods. After each heist, Terry would analyze what had worked and what hadn't, making adjustments to their plans to ensure they stayed one step ahead of the authorities. Joseph, meanwhile, focused on expanding their network of contacts, forging alliances with other criminal organizations and securing safe houses where the gang could lay low between jobs. One of the most significant changes Terry made to their operations was the introduction of psychological tactics. He realized that fear was a powerful tool, one that could be used to control not only their victims, but also the police. In one particularly daring heist, Terry and Joseph kidnapped the family of a bank manager and held them hostage overnight, threatening to harm them if the manager didn't cooperate. The next morning, the manager opened the bank for them, and the gang made off with over $500,000 in cash and valuables. The psychological impact of the heist was profound, not only on the victims, but also on the law enforcement officers tasked with bringing the gang to justice. The police were baffled by the gang's ability to strike with such precision and disappear without a trace, leaving behind only fear and confusion in their wake. As the gang's reputation grew, so did their ambitions. Terry began to dream of pulling off the ultimate heist, one that would cement their place in criminal history. He spent months planning the operation, studying the security systems of some of the most heavily guarded banks in the country. Eventually, he settled on a target, the First National Bank of Oklahoma City, one of the largest and most secure banks in the region. The bank's vault was rumored to contain millions of dollars in cash, gold, and other valuables, making it the perfect target for Terry's grand plan. But pulling off the heist would require more than just careful planning and brute force. It would require a level of coordination and discipline that few criminal organizations could achieve. Terry knew that the key to success lay in the gang's ability to work together as a single, cohesive unit, each member playing their part to perfection. To that end, he implemented a strict set of rules for the gang to follow. No one was to act independently or deviate from the plan in any way. Every detail, from the timing of the heist to the escape route, was carefully calculated and rehearsed. Terry also insisted that the gang avoid unnecessary violence, believing that it would only draw more attention from the police. Instead, he relied on intimidation and psychological manipulation to control their victims, a tactic that had proven highly effective in their previous heists. The night before the heist, Terry gathered the gang for a final briefing. They met in a secluded safe house on the outskirts of Oklahoma City, far from prying eyes. Terry laid out the plan in meticulous detail, going over every step of the operation and answering any questions the gang members had. Joseph, meanwhile, inspected the weapons and equipment they would be using, ensuring that everything was in perfect working order. As the meeting drew to a close, Terry looked around the room at the faces of his team. These were men and women who had put their trust in him, who had followed him into some of the most dangerous situations imaginable. He knew that the success of the heist depended on their ability to work together, to trust each other implicitly. "Remember," he said, his voice calm but firm, "this isn't just about the money. This is about proving that we're the best, that no one can stop us. If we stick to the plan and stay focused, we'll walk away with more than just a payday. We'll walk away with our freedom." The gang nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. They knew the risks, but they also knew the rewards, okay? And they were ready to do whatever it took to succeed. The next morning, the gang put their plan into action. Terry and Joseph led the team into the bank, disguised as federal agents. They moved with precision and confidence, their years of experience evident in every step they took. The bank's security guards were caught off guard, their training no match for the gang's ruthless efficiency. Within minutes, the gang had taken control of the bank, herding the employees and customers into a corner and securing the area. Terry approached the bank manager, a middle-aged man named Steve, and demanded that he open the vault. Steve hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out. But Terry's cold, calculating gaze left no room for doubt. "Open the vault," Terry repeated, his voice low and menacing. "Or we'll start shooting." Steve nodded, his hands trembling as he entered the code into the vault's security system. The heavy door swung open, revealing stacks of cash, gold bars, and other valuables. Terry's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he motioned for the gang to start loading the money into their duffel bags. The heist was going exactly as planned, but as the gang worked, Terry couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had spent months planning every detail of the operation, but there was always the possibility of something going wrong. He glanced around the room, his eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. That's when he noticed it, a small, blinking, red light on the ceiling. It was a security camera, one that he had missed during his initial reconnaissance of the bank. Terry's heart skipped a beat as he realized the implications. The camera was still active. It meant that the police could be watching them, right? Now, tracking their every move. He quickly motioned for Joseph to join him, pointing out the camera. Joseph's face darkened as he understood the situation. "We need to move," he said, his voice tense. "Now." Terry nodded, his mind racing as he tried to figure out their next move. They had planned for every contingency, but this was something they hadn't anticipated. The gang finished loading the money into the duffel bags and made their way to the exit. Their movements quick and deliberate. But as they stepped outside, they were met with a wall of police cars, their lights flashing and sirens blaring. The gang had walked right into a trap. The sight of the police cars surrounding the bank sent a wave of panic through the gang. Terry's mind raced as he tried to process what had gone wrong. He had planned every detail of the heist with meticulous precision. Somehow, the police had been one step ahead. The blinking red light on the security camera flashed in his mind, a glaring oversight that now threatened to undo everything they had worked for. Joseph, standing beside him, clenched his fists, his eyes darting around as he assessed the situation. The gang members behind them froze, their faces pale with fear. Terry knew they had only seconds to make a decision. "Back inside," he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The gang obeyed without hesitation, retreating into the bank and slamming the door shut behind him. Terry's mind was a whirlwind of calculations as he tried to figure out their next move. The police had them surrounded, but they still had hostages: Steve, the bank manager, and a handful of employees and customers. If they played their cards right, they might still be able to negotiate their way out of this. But Terry also knew that time was not on their side. The longer they stayed inside the bank, the more likely it was that the police would storm the building. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was tense. The hostages huddled together in a corner, their faces filled with fear. Terry approached Steve, his gun trained on the trembling man. "You," he said, his voice cold and steady, "are going to help us get out of here. If you do exactly as I say, no one gets hurt. But if you try anything stupid..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Steve nodded, his hands shaking as he raised them in surrender. Terry turned to Joseph and the rest of the gang, his mind racing as he formulated a plan. "We're going out the back," he said. "There's a service entrance that leads to an alley. If we move fast, we can make it to the cars before the police realize what's happening." Joseph nodded, his expression grim but determined. The gang members exchanged nervous glances, but said nothing. They trusted Terry, and they knew that their only chance of survival was to follow his lead. Terry handed Steve a phone and instructed him to call the police. "Tell them we're coming out," he said, "and tell them that if they try to stop us, we'll start shooting the hostages." Steve hesitated, his hands trembling as he dialed the number. Terry watched him closely, his finger resting on the trigger of his gun. He knew that one wrong move could mean the end for all of them. Outside, the police were preparing for a standoff. The bank was surrounded, with officers positioned at every exit. The SWAT team was on standby, ready to storm the building if necessary. The police chief, a grizzled veteran named Detective Harris, stood at the front of the barricade, his eyes fixed on the bank's doors. He had been tracking Terry and Joseph for months, and he wasn't about to let them slip through his fingers. Now, when the call came in from Steve, Harris listened carefully, his jaw tightening as he heard the demands. "We're coming out," Steve said, his voice shaking. "If you try to stop us, they'll start shooting the hostages." Harris clenched his fists, his mind racing as he tried to figure out the best course of action. He knew that Terry and Joseph were dangerous, but he also knew that he couldn't risk the lives of the hostages. After a moment of tense silence, Harris made his decision. "Let them go," he said to his team. "Follow them. We'll get them when they least expect it." The officers nodded, their faces set with determination. They had been chasing Terry and Joseph for too long to let them escape now. Inside the bank, Terry and his gang were preparing to make their move. They had gathered the hostages together and were using them as human shields as they made their way to the service entrance. Terry led the way, his gun trained on Steve as they moved through the bank's corridors. Joseph brought up the rear, his eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. The gang members followed closely behind, their duffel bags filled with cash and valuables slung over their shoulders. As they reached the service entrance, Terry paused, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that the next few minutes would determine whether they lived or died. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped outside, his gun pressed against Steve's back. The alley was empty, but Terry knew that the police were watching. He motioned for the gang to follow, their movements quick and deliberate. They made their way to the cars parked at the end of the alley, their eyes darting around for any signs of the police. Terry's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts as he tried to anticipate the police's next move. He knew that they wouldn't let them go without a fight, but he also knew that they had the upper hand for now. As the gang piled into the cars, Terry kept his gun trained on Steve. "You're coming with us," he said, his voice cold and steady. "The police tried to follow us. You're the first one to go." Steve nodded, his face pale with fear. Terry shoved him into the back seat of one of the cars and climbed in after him, his eyes scanning the alley for any signs of movement. Joseph took the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he started the engine. The other gang members followed in a second car, their faces set with determination. As they pulled out of the alley, Terry kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, watching for any signs of the police. He knew that they were being followed, but he also knew that they had a head start. If they could just make it to the highway, they might be able to lose the police in the traffic. But Terry also knew that the police wouldn't give up that easily. They had been chasing him and Joseph for too long to let them escape now. The car sped through the streets of Oklahoma City, their tires screeching as they rounded corners and weaved through traffic. Terry's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts as he tried to anticipate the police's next move. He knew that they would be setting up roadblocks and checkpoints, trying to cut off their escape routes. But Terry also knew the city like the back of his hand, and he had planned for this. He directed Joseph to take a series of back roads and side streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where the police were likely to be waiting. The gang members in the second car followed closely behind, their eyes darting around for any signs of trouble. As they approached the highway, Terry felt a surge of hope. If they could just make it onto the open road, they might be able to lose the police for good. But as they merged onto the highway, Terry's heart sank. Up ahead, he could see a line of police cars blocking the road, their lights flashing and sirens blaring. The police had set up a roadblock. There was no way around it. Terry's mind raced as he tried to figure out their next move. They couldn't stop. If they did, they would be caught for sure. But they also couldn't risk a high-speed chase with the police. He glanced at Joseph, who was gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. "We're going through," Terry said, his voice calm but firm. "Hold on." Joseph nodded, his jaw clenched as he pressed down on the accelerator. The car surged forward, its engine roaring as it sped toward the roadblock. The police officers scattered as the car barreled through the barricade, the sound of shattering glass and screeching metal filling the air. Terry's heart pounded in his chest as they raced down the highway, the police cars close behind. He knew that they were running out of time, but he also knew that they couldn't give up now. They had come too far to let the police catch them. As they sped down the highway, Terry's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He knew that they needed to find a place to lay low, somewhere the police wouldn't think to look. He directed Joseph to take the next exit, leading them onto a series of back roads that wound through the countryside. Gang members in the second car followed closely behind, their faces set with determination. As they drove, Terry kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, watching for any signs of the police. He knew that they were still out there, still chasing them, but he also knew that they had a chance if they could just stay one step ahead. The cars sped through the night, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they made their way to a remote safe house that Terry had prepared for just such an occasion. It was a risky move, but Terry knew that it was their only chance. As they pulled up to the safe house, Terry felt a surge of relief. They had made it for now. We also knew that the police wouldn't give up that easily. The chase was far from over. The safe house was an old, abandoned farmhouse tucked away in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods and miles of empty fields. Terry had chosen it for its isolation, knowing that it would be the last place the police would think to look. As the cars pulled up to the house, Terry felt a mix of relief and tension. They had made it this far, but the night was far from over. The gang members piled out of the cars, their faces pale and drawn from the adrenaline of the chase. Terry quickly ushered them inside, his eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. He knew that the police would be searching for them, and they couldn't afford to let their guard down now. Inside, the house was sparse and dusty, with only a few pieces of furniture and some basic supplies. Terry had stocked it with enough food and water to last them a few days, but it was far from comfortable. Still, it was better than being caught by the police. As the gang settled in, Terry took charge, his mind already working on their next move. He knew that they couldn't stay here for long. The police would eventually track them down, but they needed time to regroup and come up with a plan. He assigned Joseph to keep watch outside, while the rest of the gang members took turns resting and keeping an eye on the hostages. Steve, the bank manager, was still with them, his face pale and his hands trembling as he sat in a corner of the room. Terry approached him, his gun still in hand. "You're going to help us get out of this," he said, his voice cold and steady. "If you cooperate, you might just live to see another day." Steve nodded, his eyes wide with fear. He knew that he was in a dangerous situation, but he also knew that he had no choice but to do as he was told. Terry turned his attention to the rest of the gang, his mind racing as he tried to figure out their next move. They had the money from the heist, but it was useless if they couldn't get away with it. He knew that the police would be watching all the usual escape routes, so they needed to come up with something unexpected. After a few moments of tense silence, Terry finally spoke. "We're going to split up," he said. "It's the only way to throw them off our trail. Joseph and I will take one car, and the rest of you will take the other. We'll meet up at the rendezvous point in 3 days. If anyone gets caught, they're on their own." The gang members nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew the risks, but they also knew that they had no other choice. Terry handed out fake IDs and cash to each of them, along with instructions on how to get to the rendezvous point. He also gave them strict orders to avoid drawing attention. Themselves, no flashy spending, no unnecessary risks. They needed to stay under the radar if they were going to make it out of this alive. As the gang prepared to leave, Terry pulled Joseph aside. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. Joseph nodded, his expression grim. The two men stepped outside, where they could speak without being overheard. "This isn't over," Terry said, his eyes scanning the darkness. "The police aren't going to stop until they catch us. Need to be ready for anything." Joseph nodded, his jaw clenched. "It's a plan?" he asked. Terry took a deep breath, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a solution. "We need to disappear," he said, finally, completely. "No more heists, no more risks. We take the money we have and we go underground. We change our names, our appearances, everything. We start over." Joseph frowned, his brow furrowed in thought. "And what about the others?" he asked. Terry shook his head. "They're on their own," he said. "We can't afford to take any chances. If they get caught, they'll lead the police right to us." Joseph nodded, his expression grim but determined. He knew that Terry was right. They couldn't afford to take any more risks. it was time to cut their losses and disappear. As the gang prepared to leave, Terry felt a pang of guilt. He had led these people into this life, and now he was leaving them to fend for themselves. But he also knew that he had no other choice. The stakes were too high, and he couldn't afford to let sentimentality cloud his judgment. He gave the gang members one last look before turning away, his mind already focused on the next step. Joseph followed him to the car, his expression unreadable. The two men climbed in, and Terry started the engine, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. As they drove away from the safe house, Terry couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. The road behind them was empty, the only sound, the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. The next few days were a blur of tension and paranoia. Terry and Joseph drove through the night, avoiding main roads and sticking to back roads and side streets. They stopped only to refuel and grab quick meals, always keeping an eye out for any signs of the police. Terry's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts as he tried to anticipate the police's next move. He knew that they would be searching for them, and he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. As they approached the rendezvous point, Terry felt a surge of relief. They had made it thus far, but he also knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The rendezvous point was an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of a small town. Terry had chosen it for its isolation and its proximity to the Canadian border. If they could just make it across the border, they would be home free. As they pulled up to the warehouse, Terry's heart sank. The place was deserted, with no sign of the other gang members. He knew that they had either been caught or had decided to go their own way. Either way, it was a setback, but Terry wasn't about to let it stop him. He and Joseph quickly unloaded the money from the car and carried it inside, their movements quick and deliberate. The warehouse was dark and musty, with only a few beams of light filtering through the cracks in the walls. Terry set to work, his mind racing as he tried to figure out their next move. They needed to get across the border, but they couldn't risk using their usual methods. The police would be watching all the usual crossing points, so they needed to come up with something unexpected. After a few moments of tense silence, Terry finally spoke. "We're going to go by boat," he said. "It's a small fishing village about 50 miles from here. We can hire a boat and cross the border that way. It's risky, but it's our best shot." Joseph nodded, his expression grim but determined. He knew that they had no other choice. The two men quickly packed up the money and loaded it back into the car, their movements quick and efficient. As they drove to the fishing village, Terry's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Hey,